the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm driving my friend back home after he stayed with us for the weekend to visit the Hot Rod and Modified Nationals show at Peterborough. Because we've got a few issues with Peggy that I'll go through in the podcast, that means that if I store the car, we're going to have a few problems in getting my friend home. But anyway, today's quirk of classic car ownership is really how long we'll spend cleaning and looking after our cars, only for us to need to probably put our hands all over them to get them to start again. And that's really what happened to us yesterday. So yesterday we attended the Nationals for the Hot Rod and Modified show. It was held at Peterborough, East of England Showground, and it was kind of advertised in the Custom Car magazine, which is one of the places that I saw it, because I'd bought the magazine to read all about Scarlett DeVay's car and had seen it advertised in there. And I'd also seen it advertised on Facebook events, and so had invited two of our friends who we hadn't seen in a little while to come and attend their first classic car show and have a look at some interesting cars. I thought it might be a kind of good middle ground for people that hadn't been to any classic car shows before, purely because there would be quite a variety by the looks of it, and there would be some pretty interesting, quite unusual looking cars to interest somebody who perhaps isn't that interested in looking at just your regular everyday cars all the time, especially vintage ones. We attended the Saturday of the event, and we paid £10 per person in the car to get in. We drove over because it was quite a local show really to us on the Saturday morning. It took us about 20 minutes really to get there, and we realised on the drive over that there wasn't any charging coming through on my voltmeter down there, and that we were reading kind of negative. But we thought, well, as long as I don't stall, we'll make it there. I've got jump leads, there's going to be plenty of cars that can help us get home, and we can fix the issue later. So we successfully got to the queue, and then once in the queue I stalled it. So the three lads, my two friends and Jamie, all got out and pushed to give me a bump start, and there was actually supposed to be arrival photos taken, and that would have been an absolutely iconic arrival photo, but when we went and had a look at the arrival photos, we couldn't find it, and so we're going to see if it turns up on the website, but I'm not sure if we were at the right gate or if they just weren't putting any photos up from there, because the kind of timings that they were showing was missing about the 20-minute window that we arrived in. Now, we told the guy at the gate that we'd arrived and everything, and handed over our tickets, and I said that we'd had an issue with charging, that's why he'd seen us kind of bump starting, and he said, oh well, if you need it later, you can obviously have a jump start off of me, just come and find me and we'll sort you out. And then I said, well, where are we to go? And he wasn't really sure if you weren't with a club. He said that the parking was kind of full, so told us really just to kind of park by the entrance there, literally just inside the gate, with a couple of these American cars that were there in the camping section really. So that's what we did. We parked up there, wandered up through all the camping, saw a few interesting cars there, including a Firebird that my friends thought was really lovely. It was all done in kind of a matte black finish and looked amazing, to be fair. And we wandered up and started to find kind of a lot of the cars. We'd been handed a bit of paper at the start as we'd entered, along with our sticker for entry, and on that there was supposed to be our kind of track and trace scan-in and our QR code to access the programme and events for the day. But all of us kind of tried to scan that QR code and we couldn't get it to work, so we didn't really have much of an idea of what was going on. So we just kind of wandered up, found what looked like to be the main show and a lot of cars, and wandered around a few of those. There was a few interesting kind of groups there, again all kind of club stands that people were with, mostly kind of more modern stuff, so really from mid-90s onwards, that had all been kind of modified and things like that. We did spot in amongst those a pre-war Morris Minor, which I was very excited about, ran over and had a good look at, and the guy came up and spoke to me. He'd only had it a year. It was his kind of retirement birthday present, and he'd really been enjoying it and was looking forward to attending a few more events, but had come with his son, who was part of one of these more modern modified clubs, so that he could see some of the American so we wandered a few more kind of car areas, found a few stalls that had kind of bits and pieces for your cars on. It was very heavily focused on a lot of detailing brands. If there's ever a detailing brand, you're going to find it at that show. There were so many, and it did kind of feel a little bit repetitive after a while, to see just kind of more detailing brands. And it was really nice to see the occasional thing breaking it up. For example, I saw Pop Bang Colour, who does some really interesting continuous drawings of cars, and he had kind of a setup there that he was working on pieces whilst at the show, and you could kind of buy mugs and t-shirts and pin badges and all sorts with his work on. And so I had a good look at some of his stuff, and it was nice to see it in the flesh. But other than that, the stalls were really a lot of the same bits and pieces. It would have been nice to see a bit more of a variety in terms of those stalls. We were then kind of there for the opening of what we kind of thought was the main hall, and I guess it was the main hall for the more modern modified items. And so we had a good look around those, and we were actually really the first kind of group of people that were allowed in, so we didn't have to wait. But when we were kind of finished and looking for the way out of the hall, we did realise that there had been quite a queue accumulating in the atrium to get in. So it was obviously quite popular with a lot of the people that were there. So to get there kind of first and get in and have a good look round to start with was quite a good plan. It was quite interesting. There was some really interesting designs of cars and modifications in there. I really liked, I think it was a Mercedes-Benz that had been named Harold, that had quite a lot of interesting stuff done to it, and the owner of the car was stood with it and talking to people, which was really nice to see. But other than that, it did feel kind of quite commercialised in there. There was a lot of what felt like brands of modifications telling you that this is what we can do to your car, rather than what you could do to your car, and giving you kind of inspiration. It was a really good opportunity, if you're into your supercars, to get really quite up close and personal with a lot of them. But it wasn't really what me personally had gone for. I think my friends had kind of enjoyed it. And at this point I was starting to get kind of confused, because we'd been walking around for ages and we'd seen like maybe 3 of what I guess you'd call your traditional hot rods. We started to kind of wander back towards where we parked Peggy, and that's when we came across this area that was inside the huts that had all these cars with the hydraulic suspensions in really interesting positions, and so that was really cool to see. We'd seen a few of them, I guess, showboating as they came in with what they could do with their suspension, and there were some really beautiful bits of kind of paintwork and things on those that were really enjoyable to have a look around. And it was then that we realised that we kind of wandered into the area where the hot rods and more American-based cars were going to be. We found the tattoo convention that we didn't even realise was going to be there, and we found the hall that was much smaller, much less kind of panic to get in, but something that I think as a group we enjoyed a lot more of, the American style hot rods, and some really beautiful examples of cars that people had obviously spent a really long time working on. The custom car magazine stand was in there as well, and there was a really interesting modified Morris Minor in there. But our car really of the show as a group was definitely, I believe it was a Ford Anglia that had been bought by the owner in 1997, the year when all of us were born, and he had spent so much time working on it and doing all this stuff to it, and it was actually displayed with mirrors underneath the bodywork to show kind of all the work that was also underneath it. It was a really lovely car, and you could see it had been an absolute labour of love and something the guy should have been really proud of, and I'm sure he was. And in this area we found a few more stalls that offered a few different things, like hot rod versions of show t-shirts, which I'm modelling today if you're watching this on YouTube, and a few kind of other bits and pieces, and some interesting stalls there that offered a bit more variety to all of the detailing brands that were there. And as we came out of that hall, we realised that we'd found kind of the show field for the Americans and classics, and that this was kind of where Peggy really ought to have been parked, and I really wanted to move her up, and my friends were like, but she's parked and she's near where she needs to be if we need to jump start her, and it's a good if we need to do it. So I said, well, let's flip a coin. And so we flipped a coin, and they said it can't move her. But I said, okay, but what if she starts? So they said, okay, well, if she starts, you can move her, because we're not bump starting her. And so she started. So we moved her up the field. I got to park her with all these beautiful American cars, and get some really nice photos and stuff of her next to what I think was Plymouth. And from then we carried on having a look around these cars, and then sat in the kind of bar area where there was a band playing for a bit, and from there I could see people kind of coming up and looking at her, looking kind of confused because it probably wasn't the car they was expecting to see. Other than the pre-war Morris Minor, it was the only Morris Minor at the show, probably not their usual haunts, but it was nice to kind of see people showing a little bit of interest in her, even though there was some other really interesting cars. She did look absolutely tiny, obviously, next to some of these American cars, but with her brand new red wheels, she didn't look massively out of place in terms of style. We went and got some lunch after that, and sat and looked at a few more cars over towards where food stalls were. These were kind of more modern cars again, and then we decided that the Wall of Death that we had seen on the walk-in was something that we really wanted to see. I really love Indian motorcycles. One of my favourite films is The Fastest Indian, and if you've not seen that, I highly recommend checking it out. I really love that film, and so I was really keen to see what the involvement of these 1920s Indians was in the show. So for £3 to see a show there, and it was maybe a 15-minute show, but it was amazing. I'm going to insert some footage here of it if you're watching it on YouTube, and if you're listening on Spotify, I definitely recommend possibly popping over at some point to my YouTube channel and checking out this footage. If you see these guys at any show that you are going to, you absolutely have to go and see it. It was amazing. They're so good at what they do. It's so like mind-blowing to see them do it, and then it wasn't just motorcycles, they did it in kind of like a little buggy as well. So really, that was the absolute highlight of the show. One of my friends said to me that kind of even with the ticket price and the additional price to see that was worth coming to the show alone to see that happening. So that was kind of the last thing we did. We walked back to Peggy, fingers crossed that she would have a miraculous ability to start herself again. Alas, she didn't. So we had to push her kind of off the field and try to bump start her. Were unsuccessful, and so managed to get the guy who had been at the gate to help us with jump starting her. And he was really helpful and very kind and helped us there. But then my friend on the way home said, oh, can we kind of stop and get some milkshakes or something from McDonald's? And I was like, well, yeah, we're running, as long as I don't stall it. Those famous last words, we should be fine to kind of go through a drive-through. So that's what we did. And then during the drive-through, I stalled it. So two of the guys got out and pushed her through the drive-through. But a few cars in front of us in the drive-through, I'd actually seen a local garage that I've used a few times, a little runabout car, and so we stopped them and got ourselves another jump off of them, very kind, and he helped us to get back home. So aside from the fact that we're now having to desperately get Peggy over to my parents to work out what some of the issues might be with the charging and possibly related to the overheating and things that we've had, in the hope that we can get her to Gaydon next weekend, it was a really interesting show. It wasn't exactly what we'd signed up for. It wasn't what I'd kind of thought it was going to be. It was interesting. It was kind of quite unique. There was a lot of very well looked after, beautiful cars, and I would say that if you're more into some of your supercars and things like that, it's definitely worth a visit. But if you're going for looking at American and hot rod cars, then there's probably going to be other shows that would be more for you. It wasn't a huge part. It did feel like it was kind of shoved over to one side and less focused on. I think there's a few things that they could do to just make the experience perhaps a little better. I don't know if it was entirely COVID related, but the kind of QR program, when we've paid kind of £40 as a car to get in, it would have been good to have access to a physical program which would have given us a map and things like that to get a better idea of where the stuff we actually wanted to see was to start the day off, get a better idea of what sort of things were going on, because I feel like there was probably stuff that we missed, and that was through no fault really of our own. We walked around quite a lot of it, but there was kind of areas where there was supposed to be events on and things that we just didn't know when and if they were happening, because we went on the Saturday, so some of that stuff might have only been for the Sunday. It was an interesting day. It's certainly an experience to take a Little Morris Minor to such a show. I felt like it was an alright thing to do, because they said on kind of the website and that they were looking for kind of any classic cars pre-1970. But aside from us and the pre-war Morris Minor. We were really the only British car that wasn't heavily modified at the show. And although if you've listened to last week's podcast, you know that she is slightly modified. And it was an interesting show, but perhaps not one that we'll be super excited to attend in future. I think it was good as a one-off, but not something we'll be looking desperately to attend again in future. Thank you so much for listening. I'd be interested to hear if you have attended that sort of show before and how you found it, or if you've got some other exciting shows that you're really looking forward to attending this year, or something perhaps a little bit more unusual like that. Thanks again for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.